Very good.
All right, we're live.
All right, what's going on, everybody? This is Dr. Schilling from Sequoia Health. I always forget that. Bringing this week's Wednesday Wellness Minutes. And this week we're going to talk about a controversial subject, not from the standpoint of what you should or should not do, just trying to bring some calm and peace to the whole conversation, because in reality what's happening is people are losing their minds, okay? And logic is throwing out the window because everybody's afraid, and then their blood vessels are constricting and their frontal lobes collapse and their decision-making processes are going out the window, okay? So first we need to, as we talked about, first seek to understand the point and perspective of everybody else. Before I do that, though, I would like to invite a new team member onto the camera to introduce herself. This is Melissa.
Hi, guys. I'm Melissa.
And she's just joined the team. It's her second day. She's going to be working part-time here as we first start out until she gets her kids herded from a different standpoint.
Yes.
And then she'll be with us full-time. So we're really excited to have her on board. I just want to introduce her to you.
Yes, thank you. And I'm super excited to be here to get you all to your optimal health and wellness.
Awesome. Thanks, Melissa.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So this subject is getting to a fever pitch, and people are just going a little bit crazy about it. So we want to kind of take a step back and say, okay, all right, let's let cooler heads prevail. Just some of the headlines. I just want to read some of the headlines because these, whatever side of the fence you're on, it doesn't matter. But they're starting to try and fearmonger, which is going to make you make decisions either one way or the other. There's not going to be a balance and well educated. So first off, the measles cases in the U.S. just hit a 25-year high thanks to anti-vaxxers. So labeling one, pitting one against another. There's a measles outbreak. Do you need another shot? So another fear tactic. There are now representatives, even Republicans and Democrats, that are both pushing for interesting bills. Like some are co-sponsoring, Democrat and Republican, for taking your rights away as a parent and or a guardian. And there's other ones that are saying, wait, hold on. This is infringing upon my constitutional rights and things like that. So Representative Metcalf pushes for a bill requiring doctors to treat unvaccinated kids, because some clinics are saying, we will not treat your child unless they've been vaccinated. So they're basically, we're not going to give you the health care you need if your child is not vaccinated, and things like that. Amid the measles scare in Wisconsin, legislators are seeking to end the personal conviction, if you will, the conscientious objector, if you will, to say, I'm not going to do this because it's against my religious beliefs. So they're taking away rights there. And then mothers of a measles-stricken infant said, our community failed us. So now they're blaming the entire community and saying that the community failed them. I also saw another article that said, dear anti-vax parents, we're not mad at you. This is coming from a pediatric MD. So I'm glad he ordained himself as someone to speak on behalf of all medical professionals and all healthcare professionals in general. But these are just some of the things that you can see out on the internet. But the vaccine debate is not new. So first understand that this is from the day that a vaccine was developed, right? And they took the cowpox and injected some kid with chickenpox back 100 plus years ago. There were already people raising their hands saying, whoa, this is, Franken medicine and crazy stuff like that. So don't think this is something new just because people are getting more and more heightened in their awareness because of social media and because of the news and because of the fear mongering. They're trying to scare you. They're basically making you feel afraid, which is going to make you choose irrationally one way or the other. Okay? And nobody wins that way. The kids lose, the parents lose, the communities get divided, and nothing good happens there. So my motto, and it's not original to me, but it's seek first to understand. So that doesn't matter if it's with your doctor, if it's with your spouse, with your kid. You first want to understand where they're coming from and seek first to understand them before you start making assumptions and believing what you think you know what their motive is. So no matter what parent you're looking at, whether it's someone who's pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, someone in the middle, it doesn't really matter. What you really want to appreciate is every parent's just trying to do the best they can for their kids. They're just trying to do their best, because a parent who is pro-vaccine is potentially afraid of what might happen to their child if they're not vaccinated. And a parent on the other end of the spectrum, if you will, on the end of the pendulum, that is anti-vaccine, is going to say, I'm afraid of what's going to happen to my child if they get vaccinated. But understand that both of those are driven by fear. They're both driven by way out here at the extreme saying, everybody's going to get hurt by them or everybody's going to be saved by them. But not every child is going to be affected the same way by a vaccine. So always understand and look at the fellow parents in your community and say, what is the motivating factor? What's the driving factor behind this? Help them understand them. Say, oh, I understand that you're not on board with vaccinating your kids. Help me understand that. Like, tell me more. I'm fascinated. So understand them, and then you can have a different perspective, and then you can share your insights with them and say, hey, look, we've had our kids vaccinated, and maybe Johnny did great, and maybe Susie didn't do so hot with that one, and whatever it is, but these are our experiences. So maybe allay their fears and help them come back in and say, okay, maybe there's some balance here. For significantly debilitating neurological disorders, it might be advisable to get a vaccine if there's a strong feeling on your side. If you have strong feelings against that's a personal issue. We're not in a communist state. No one's dictating, Stalingrad here and saying, you got to do what we're going to say you're going to do. We're not in communist China that says we're controlling, well, we just had a conversation about this, the media. They're going to start censoring everything that's said on the internet in our country. So Facebook and everybody else is going to say, no, you can't talk about that because that's misinformation. And so that ultimately, in parentheses, is censorship. So who knows if this video will ever even been seen? Mark Zuckerberg might be at his desktop and saying, we're not going to let this out because this is too much against some establishment somewhere. Hopefully you're appreciating this as my best attempt at being non-biased and completely impartial about this. So, let's think about this for a second. No one is benefited by labeling, right? So lobbing labels at people like pro-vaccine parents calling anti-vaccine parents bad people or failing the community or stuff like that. That's typically what you hear. People are being made to feel bad about themselves and shamed and stuff like that because they're not doing something that is generally considered by the medical community to be beneficial for everyone. Whereas you don't hear a lot of people spouting up and calling people who are pro-vaccine bad people. So no matter what side of this aisle, and I'm sure there are people that do that, and there's no question, because there are people on all ends of the spectrum. But no one is going to benefit, no child, no parent, no community is going to be benefiting from labeling them as a bad person and saying, you're a horrible person, you're a horrible parent, we should take your kids away because you're not vaccinating them, you're affecting my kid's immunocompromised, so we're not going to have a play date with Johnny or Susie because your kid hasn't been vaccinated, okay? Whereas in theory, a child who's been vaccinated, in theory, has a better set of immune skills than the child who's not vaccinated, and that they should be protected from it. So why would a child who's been vaccinated be afraid of playing with a child who's not vaccinated? Because they're like, dude, I'm Teflon, you can't touch me, right? It's just rolling off, okay? So just keep in mind that you need to take a step back and take an appreciation of what's really happening here. So instead of blaming people for the problems that happen, like if a child were to get sick from a vaccine, don't blame the vaccine, blame the circumstances. Because, excuse me for a second, a lot of things can happen. It can be a child's toxicity level, it could be a neuroemotional stress, it could be the fact that they're wounded in some way, they could have fallen and had a brain injury that causes their brain not to be able to detox as well. There's all kinds of reasons why someone might have a problem with this kind of stuff. So instead of blaming people and saying, you're at fault, or something happens to your child and saying, this is to blame, because human psychology, understand, it wants to be us against them. It wants to put a finger on something like this right here. This is the cause. This is what happens. But it doesn't work like that. No one thing causes any one thing. So always understand that you got to take a step back and say, okay, as painful as it might be, you can take your power back and feel less helpless and feel more empowered by saying, I'm going to take responsibility for this. So no matter what happens to me or what happens to my family, no matter what action or egregious thing happens to us, we're going to take responsibility for it and say, okay, we're going to own that and say, no matter what happens, somehow we had some role in it and we're not necessarily happy about it, but we're going to take responsibility for it and say, now what we're going to do is make the best out of it. So take a negative, make it a positive. That's how I operate in my world. It may not necessarily work for you, but I found it much more liberating to take responsibility for everything that happens, good, bad, or indifferent. Because that way it's like, okay, I'm not, poor me. Now something happened to me, or, why are they being like this, or why is my daughter acting like this, or whatever it is. If you take responsibility and say, what am I doing to facilitate this? What lesson do I need to learn? Okay? There's always gold within these lessons. Within every problem, there's a lesson and an opportunity. We have a book for my daughter. Within every problem, there's an opportunity. Also a good one, what do you do with an idea? It's the only good book for you and your kids. All right. So also understand that when you're having these conversations, don't necessarily try to convince somebody else of your viewpoint. Try more to understand them. So seek first understanding, because whether it was Benjamin Franklin or somebody else said at one point, a man, or in this case, in every case, woman, convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. So when someone is entrenched in their opinions, they're going to be of the same opinion no matter what. Because as soon as you go on your talking points and this and that, whether you're pro or against, the human psychology goes into defense mode. It says, oh, this is contrary to what I believe. So therefore, I'm going to be defensive and I go on attack. And your brain just shuts off. You stop listening and you start just thinking about your next talking point. So first, ask questions. Tell me more about that. That's fascinating. Help me understand why you do what you do. Help me understand why you're doing that different thing. Because whether you're pro or against, we need to appreciate that there are a lot more opportunities for our children who are certainly not as healthy when they're born now as when I or someone else to my senior was born. So I was born in 78. Statistically speaking, in 1983, there were 22 doses of 7 vaccines by the age of 6. Now we have 50 doses of 14 vaccines by the age of 6. So just to keep under consideration there. By the age of 18, there are 24 doses of 7 vaccines in 1983, and now there are 69 doses of 16 vaccines by the age of 18. So by sheer number, there's a lot more opportunity for people to have adverse reactions from these things. But remember, not everybody gets it. Like to have the assertion that the MMR vaccine in and of itself causes autism is got to be, for a lot of people, just awesome. They're like, there it is, there's a silver bullet. We can label it that. But it's quite possibly not accurate because, remember, no one thing causes any one thing. The child has to be immunocompromised or detox pathway compromised. There could be neuroemotional stress, traumas, wounds, issues in the family that are making them weak. You have to take all this into consideration because no one vaccine causes any one disease. Okay, so just please take that into consideration. So all that aside, some questions you may want to ask, provided you're considering doing vaccinations, as our health officials would imply is a good idea. Is this the right time for you and your child? Are you getting a vaccine or are they getting a vaccine? Are you sick? Are you feeling under the weather? Make sure, you can always reschedule it. You can go back a different week. Make sure everybody's at their peak strength and healthiness to go in there and do that. Have there been any reactions in the past, okay, from at any point during their life? If there's been a reaction, they might be detox pathway compromised. So they may need extra help when they're detoxing these vaccines. Because it's not just like, hey, you get a shot with XYZ bug. They have other things that are going to stabilize it and help the body react to it stronger and help things get into this bloodstream faster. They're called adjuvants. And some of them are toxic for some people and some for not other people. So, we use stuff like, for injection sites, we use like MediBody Pack is a great one. So you mix it up with some mud and you do a process. We can show you how to do that. But you put it on the site. So that gets any residual toxins out of the tissue, and that helps you detox that way. Taking things like orally, like a clay or an aloe or something like that's going to help detox your digestive system, supporting the liver and things like that. I mean, as you can see, there's a ton of tools you can use to help your body heal faster and maintain the benefits of a vaccine without having the adverse side effects. Okay. Any reactions in your family? Are there any neurological disorders and things like that that might be a problem? Predispositions, if you will. Do I know the disease is there any risk for that disease in my family for what I'm getting vaccinated for? So that's just like a putting gas on a fire, potentially, if that's the case. Do I have all the information about any side effects, things like that? Because if you have a propensity, or a tendency to react in a certain way, what can happen is if you get a reaction from something, it can get way worse. Okay, so just knowing everything ahead of time. I'm not suggesting you don't do it. I'm suggesting you have all the information you need before you do it, so you can have the best outcome. Find out about any adverse reaction reports that you can find, so you can be more well informed. Keep a written record of all the patterns. So take a journal and say, okay, happened on this date. I observed this. Everything's perfect. Or this happened, then this happened, and now you have a trail to understand like what can happen if there is an adverse reaction, what to do about it later. And then, of course, you have the right to have information. If you're having a vaccine suggested to you, you want to have all the information you need possible. So you have the informed consent to say, I know exactly what I'm about to put in my body or in my child's body, and say, I'm on board with it. And then if you're not, then you say, I'm not on board with it. And that should be a right that every parent and every family has, because unless you're in a communist society that dictates everything that happens with you, it should not be forced upon you. So we use a lot of homeopathy in our clinic. You will find just as many people pro-homeopathy as they are anti-homeopathy. You'll hear it's quackery, it's sugar pills, it's placebo, there's all kinds of stuff. For anyone who has used it and has had success with it, it's certainly none of those above. But again, someone who has either had a bad reaction from something, because you can have a bad reaction from a homeopathic remedy, it's certainly possible. You can have a bad reaction from a medication as well. What you want to know is that homeopathy there's a form of something called homeoprophylaxis. And that's basically a prophylactic or preventative measure using homeopathy to expose you to In homeopathy, it's the energy imprint. It's the frequency, if you will, because all things that come into our body is a frequency. It's an energy. It's food is information. It comes in the form, when it's digested, it becomes frequency and energy for our body to use. Homeopathy works in a similar way. So what you do is you take a homeopathic remedy that would be for measles, mumps, rubella, pertussis, things like that. And you would have a similar style of administration. It's not just a one-time shot. It's usually some tablets that you'd put under the tongue and things like that for a child. But homeoprophylaxis, if you're looking for something to prevent any potential serious problems for your child, but you want to do it in a natural way, look into homeoprophylaxis. There's a place here in Minnesota. There's probably one in every state. There are national organizations for that. If you need more information about the vaccines and things like that, go to the CDC website. You can go to the Center for Vaccine Education, and then the National Vaccine Information Center. So every place you go is going to have a slant. Just appreciate that. Every news outlet and every site is going to have a belief system, if you will, that says, we believe this is right. And therefore, you want to gather information and make the best decision you can based on your family's needs and what you believe for yourself. So don't take any one thing as gospel, okay? You need to collaborate with different forms of information, different sources, and say, okay, what makes sense for us? What makes sense for my child? What makes sense for me as a parent? And things like that. Because ultimately, you need to understand what's going on and what the potential risks and benefits are. And also, getting back to our theme for today is seek first to understand. Connect with your people in your community. I'm sure if you did not have a conversation about vaccines, you'd be happy and friendly and things like that. But if for some reason that comes up, it tends to be a very divisive, very polarizing, right? Pushes people to the extremes. And then it becomes anger and frustration and lobbing, accusations and blaming and things like that. So just understand that every parent, no matter what race, creed, color, gender, persuasion they are, is just trying to do the best for their child. And so let's try to back away from the vitriol that everyone's slinging each way and saying you're bad or you're a horrible person or you should be thrown in jail for doing what you do with your kids and stuff like that. Every parent is trying to do the best for their kid. So always please take that in consideration first. So seek first to understand. This is a very challenging time for a lot of people, but understand that the news is gaining a lot of benefit from hyping this. So back away, get the information, and don't let them hype you up into a frenzy and becoming afraid for everything and everyone, okay? Do your information, understand the death rates of these diseases, what the kids, whether it's measles, mumps, rubella, pertussis, most people that get measles, it's a secondary symptom that they get. They get a pneumonia or some other reaction that can potentially be life-threatening, but it's not usually the measles that causes the problem. It's a secondary side effect or secondary infection, if you will. You can look at people have been throwing up the Brady Bunch episode recently about, how they all stuck at home when they had the measles, and they were like, this is great. We get to be out of school, blah, blah, blah. So it's not about avoiding things. It's not about blaming or naming. It's just about coming together as a community and supporting each other and just loving each other, because that's ultimately what a community is for, right? It takes a tribe, it takes a herd. You can't just raise a kid by yourself. You need people to help you out. So share it in the community with your friends and family and support each other, okay? Let us know what you'd like us to talk about. Do your friends and family a favor. Share this information so that they can be empowered to do their own investigation and then come to the table with each other and say, this is what we're trying to do to help each other grow a strong community, because, together we stand, divided we fall, as they say, right? So come together, gain understanding, and help each other out, okay? We'll look forward to seeing you next Wednesday for the Wednesday Wellness Minutes. Take good care, guys.